Oh, what a wonderful party that was. Yes, in first century Palestine, they spoke with a British accent. That was the proper thing. But anyway, well, you didn't know that. And so, he kind of calls the man out. Right there in front of all of his guests. He called him out. And that's the kind of person Jesus was. He was very subversive. He would call people out, and I don't think it was to be mean, although certainly it could have been taken that way. And I have to ask myself, if I was back in that time, or even today, if Jesus would be the first person on my dinner list, I'm thinking I probably wouldn't want him there because he'd embarrass me for some reason or another. God knows I'd screw something up. And he'd say, you know, it would be better if you do it this way. And so the Pharisees are always upset with Jesus because of all this. But what is this event that Jesus is at? This, friends, is communion. Now, we like to think of communion as the bread and the cup, and we pass it around, and we take a little piece of bread, and we take a little sip of juice or wine, and that's communion. When we say, well, I saw it in the Gospels, I saw it in Matthew. Jesus sat with his disciples at the Last Supper, and he took bread, and he took cup, and he blessed it and dedicated it to God, and that was the first communion. No, it wasn't. That was a symbolic act that took place during communion. Communion was the meal. Communion was the meal itself. And Jesus is saying, if you really want to have communion, you will invite everybody, regardless of their ability to pay you back, regardless of their ability to pump you up and raise you up to this high place where people will revere you, you will invite the least of these, and they will dine with you, and you will show true hospitality, and in that, you will be truly in communion. Now, it didn't take very long for the church to screw this up. You got to take this with a grain of salt, but the church screws a lot of things up, all right? And it goes all the way back to the beginning. And so you see Paul in Corinthians, for example. I don't know if you're familiar with this passage. You see Paul rebuking these people of communion, the rich people. They show up to communion, the meal. They show up drunk, and they eat up all the good food. And then when the poor folks get there, there's nothing left for them but breadcrumbs and water. And so Paul rebukes them. He said, this is not what communion looks like. If you're going to come here and you're going to do communion, do it the right way. All the way back in Paul in 50 AD, we see this happening. Well, here's something else I want to share with you that I thought was pretty comical. This was a document that was found with the Dead Sea Scrolls in the late 40s. And along with different scrolls of Isaiah and Jeremiah and whatnot, they found this veritable guest list for who is going to get into heaven. Imagine that. Imagine this boy's throwing stones and clink, and he opens up these clay jars and here's the guest list for heaven. Whew. The question is, do you really want to read it? Well, you'll find out that you don't. All the wise men in the congregation, the learned and the intelligent, men whose way is perfect, and men of ability, the men of renown. No man is smitten in his flesh, or paralyzed in his feet or hands, or lame, or blind, or deaf, or dumb, or smitten in his flesh with a visible blemish. No old and tottering man unable to stay still in the midst of the congregation. None of these shall come among the congregation of the men of renown. For the angels of holiness are with their congregation. How's that for a dose of joy on this Labor Day Sunday morning? Woo-hoo. So, ladies, I'm sorry. We won't be seeing you up there. Gentlemen, anybody wearing glasses? Have some trouble hearing, seeing, trouble walking, trouble speaking? Sorry, won't be seeing you there either. I'm going to be really lonely up there. Now, we know this isn't true. We know this isn't a real list, but think of the way that the church has taken the real guest list. The guest list that Jesus said, the blind, the lame, I don't care who you are all welcome here. And the church somehow has taken this list and turned it into a healthy, very healthy, unrealistic old boys club. That is not what communion was supposed to look like. We call it hospitality. when we have people in. When we do what Jesus described, we call it hospitality. But you know what? We have an entire industry that's called the hospitality industry. Oh yes, our tour guides and our hotels and our restaurants showing hospitality. Well, what wonderful hospitality is that? I can't say that I can complain if I go to the Palmer House Hilton and sleep on those nice cushy beds, and when the folks carry my luggage for me and make me feel like I'm the king of Araby. But you know, when the hand comes out, I wake up and I say, oh yes, that's why they're doing that. That's why they're doing it. It wasn't out of kindness. It wasn't hospitality, but somehow we have the gall to call this the hospitality industry. And for some reason, the church looks to them to find out how to do hospitality. The church should be the epitome. The church should be the consultants for hospitality. The hotels should be coming here and saying, show us how to do hospitality, because that is what we call ourselves, the hospitality industry. But instead, we have our group and we have those people. And Jesus came to tell us that this is not the way that we do communion. Because friends, when you're truly in communion, think of the word. Think of the word. We think of the noun communion about this right here. We think of this as communion. But communion is when you're in fellowship with other people, regardless of what they can do for you, when you're gathered at a table, around a meal, listening to each other, caring for one another, genuinely being interested in what the other person's needs and wants and desires and feelings are, and we are in communion, showing true hospitality for one another. If we as the church are going to call ourselves Christ-like, if we are going to say that we are emulating Jesus Christ, then we're going to have to be a little more subversive like he was. Imagine if every communion Sunday we sent a note out to a different block and we said, hey, dinner at our house, meet us there. And we invited people for a meal. Imagine if we were that subversive. No, but that's not done. That's not the way we do things. That's just not how the church is. I don't care. Jesus said it was. And I think I'll go with Jesus any day. But you know what? We don't only have to be prepared to be a little subversive and a little bit out of the ordinary. We don't have to only worry about upsetting the norm. We also have to be prepared to be blessed beyond belief. Because when we sit across the table from these folks who are here not just to be fed, but here because the same way we care for them, they are caring for us. And we are forging those bonds in our community the way that Jesus taught us to do. It says right here at the end of this passage, and you will be blessed because they cannot repay you. Not because they can, but because they can't. And in that we'll know that we have genuine relationship and true, radical blessing. May it be so among us. Amen.